Good evening, everyone. It is March 4th, and I want to talk about what's going on in Ukraine. I got the map up. We're going to specifically hone in on Bakhmut, which has been the key hotbed recently of operations. So as you can see, I've got the battlefields in Ukraine lined up here, and we'll zoom in on Bakhmut so we can talk about it a little more here. All right, so with regard to Bakhmut, as you can see what the Russians are trying to accomplish here, they're conducting a pincher move to try and envelop the city, likely trying to cause a siege situation for the Ukrainians. What's interesting is over the last 7 months, there's really been no change to this region whatsoever. It's just been stagnant. However, Russia has committed new forces and an offensive, and they've pulled forces from other regions to fight in this area, as well as employed the Wagner Group, private military company, to try to really break through, as Bakhmut has become very symbolic for the Kremlin. Estimates have that somewhere around 40 to 50,000 Russian troops and Wagner Group fighters have died on this battlefield in Bakhmut. Estimated 10 to 15,000 Ukrainians have died. And the last time the world saw a battlefield with this many dead was the siege of Basra in Iraq in 1987 during the Iran-Iraq War. In Europe, it was the Battle of Berlin in 1943. So there is possible word that Ukrainians are building a counterattack force that we could see employed in the next 24 to 72 hours, but Ukraine is holding back its new Western equipment and the majority of its troops for an anticipated offensive coming in the spring. So if there is any kind of counterattack, it would largely be to shore up and bolster any kind of rear guard forces as a withdrawal is conducted. Now, a withdrawal or a retrograde operation is an actual operation in a U.S. Army term. I don't know if that's what they call it in the Ukrainian military, but it's a task employed regularly during mobile defenses or a delay operation. The aim is to cause a delay for the enemy as they move through the city, allowing the Ukrainian troops to reinforce at a fallback position. It's a routine tactic. It's something that every major military has done, and it is not the harbinger of disaster. It's not this awful situation. To quote McRyan on this, this isn't some disaster situation for Ukraine. This is an actual tactic used to regroup for future offensive operations. Now, obviously, the battle has been filled with political value for the Kremlin as they see it as some sort of area where if they take it, they have secured a major victory, and you'll likely see it played all over Russian TV. President Zelensky visited it. Obviously, Putin didn't because he's a huge coward, but President Zelensky visited the Bakhmut region to meet with his soldiers. It's also been a source of angst for the Kremlin because a lot of the gains have been made by Prigozhin, the Wagner Group leader, and he has openly spewed vitriol against the Kremlin and the Russian military for their lack of ability to take Bakhmut while he can. So he's going to potentially gain some political capital here and become more dangerous, at least for the Kremlin. However, this isn't to say Ukraine has done nothing here. Ukraine largely accomplished its mission in Bakhmut. So I don't think Ukraine is going to defend it much longer. This battle has allowed Ukraine to attrit the Russian forces in the east, forcing them to continue committing resources and equipment and men to a battle in a town that really has not a lot of strategic value when you put it in the grander scheme of what is in the area with Donetsk and Luhansk and Severodonetsk and some of these other cities that Russia operates out of, especially when you have the 7th Assault Airborne Regiment in the region not even moving into Bakhmut. This has forced Russia to focus so many units that could have been used elsewhere to build up defenses for what essentially will be a major Ukrainian offensive in the spring. Ukraine committed 30,000 troops and held off against a little over 90,000 Russian troops when you count the Wagner Group, and they attrited Russia at a rate of 4-1, so 4 dead Russians for every 1 Ukrainian. That's pretty significant. Now, once the decision is made to withdraw, they'll have to conduct some deception operations, employ decoys, increase fire support, and make it look like nothing's really changed. They'll also have to shore up the rear guard and make sure that rear guard does not leave. They must hold their positions until their assigned withdrawal time, which can be really difficult when you're in the face of an enemy that is coming towards you and there's a strong inclination to retreat. They'll also be moving under the cover of Ukrainian artillery fire, as well as jamming and probably some additional bolstered air defense systems and air support. The potential movements for Ukraine, where I think their fallback point is going to probably fall somewhere along the Kramatorsk line here, and I'll show you exactly where I'm talking about here. If I zoom out, so a line probably where they're looking is going to be Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. So somewhere along here is where they will probably regroup and live to fight another day against the Russians. Big thing about Kramatorsk is this was a part of the battlefields in the 2014 Russian invasion into Ukraine. They've had 8 years to reinforce the city, and it sits on higher ground. As you can see, it's not easy to get to Kramatorsk. You have to cross a ridge here that runs, and then another one here. So these ridges are all within the sight lines for artillery. These roads here, this road here, this road here are all within artillery range of Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. So I don't think Russia is going to use Bakhmut as a logistics hub. I just don't think it's going to be much of a gain for Russia at this point. The two roads will have been pre-sighted in. So it'd be foolish for Russia to start conducting any kind of road-bound, which is largely what they're stuck with, is road-bound operations, trying to move into Sloviansk or Kramatorsk using the major highways. Any kind of interior movements of troops are going to run into these ridges, and that's going to be basically a death trap. So what did Russia gain? Well, essentially nothing here, in my opinion, which is why Ukraine only committed 30,000 of its 500,000 strong army. Ukraine wanted to retreat the Russians, and they certainly did. The town has largely been razed. It has no population remaining and no viable strategic value for logistics due to its proximity to the Ukrainian fallback areas in Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. It only really gives Putin Prigozhin the ability to tout a Russian victory, which is the only location along the 600-mile front where Russia's made gains. Really, all we've only seen Russia make gains recently in this war is in this bubble right here. That's it. And that's not very much when you have a 600-mile front. Yes, the Russians could try to launch along the E40 and potentially could try and take Chasivyar next, but that's a lateral movement. It's not necessary movements towards anything significant. Similar to Severodonetsk in May and June of last year, the Ukrainians attrited the Russians heavily, are probably going to regroup and then push for a large offensive. The same thing took place with Severodonetsk when they took Kharkiv and Kherson after severely depleting the Russian troops. This time, though, the difference here is 65,000 Ukrainian troops are coming back from NATO and European training centers with Western equipment as they arrive. And Russia concentrated nearly a third of its forces to Bakhmut against less than 1/10 of the Ukrainian forces. So I talk about a potential offensive in a previous video, but this is a tactical withdrawal. I think it's a smart to withdraw. I think the Russians will say they accomplished their mission, and yes, they wanted to take Bakhmut, but they lost tens of thousands of soldiers. And I'm a boxer, and I love boxing. I haven't been doing it long, but I've been doing it long enough to know that in a boxing match, a fighter might retreat to the ropes in the hopes of kind of luring their opponent into what's called a rope-a-dope, which basically you wear yourself out by throwing punches that are really ineffective. And that's exactly what Ukraine seems to have done in Bakhmut. They did it before last summer when they held fighting in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk and then retreated, only to later take Kherson and Kharkiv, which is far worse for the Russians than just gaining Severodonetsk. Losing those two major cities was huge for Russia, and I'm pretty sure this is going to happen again. Ukraine is seemingly using the same tactics and drawing Russia in, and Russia is falling for it yet again. But again, just to wrap up, as Russia probably takes Bakhmut, we could see the Ukrainians fall back to Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, and then they could sight all of these roads, sight even Bakhmut with their rocket artillery. So Russia can't really establish anything.